Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome back to another Fallout 4 Mods Weekly, the show where we take a look at some really cool and interesting mods that have come out in the past week for Fallout 4. Now, I know it hasn't exactly been a week since the last Mods Weekly, but this weekend is pretty crazy for me, and I figured it was better to get this video out early as opposed to really late. And we've had a pretty packed week of mods anyways, so there's still a lot of really cool stuff to show off regardless, making plenty of room for more mods to release next week for the following Mods Weekly. Anyways, this week we have a ton of cool stuff, lots of variety, brand new enemies, brand new armors, one new weapon mod, and some cool little utility mods sprinkled in here and there. It's a very good week for Fallout 4 modding. Let's go ahead and begin with the first mod, which is Faction Reinforcements by RascalArt. Now, if you're not familiar with RascalArt, they are the king of adding tons of new and interesting enemies into the game. And in this mod, we're going to add a ton of new enemies to all of the existing factions in Fallout 4, which is really cool. If you ever thought that a faction maybe didn't have enough variety in combat, well, this mod is going to help address that by adding at least one new big powerhouse enemy to each of the factions. Let's go ahead and just run through it from faction to faction. Starting with the Brotherhood of Steel, you have the brand new Centurions. What RascalArt calls the natural progression from power armor, this is a gigantic, essentially walking tank. This is going to be some super buffed up power armor. There is actually a person inside of this thing, believe it or not, and these guys are absolutely huge. They'll start spawning in after level 30, and they'll actually be called in by signal grenades thrown by other Brotherhood of Steel members, and they will drop in from the sky, which is really cool. They come equipped with their own unique laser pistol of sorts, and they use some pretty interesting animations coming from the Protectrons, but it does kind of work. Then we also have another addition to the Brotherhood of Steel, and that is the Vertihawk gunship. This is going to be, quote-unquote, the big brother to the Vertibird. This thing comes in packing a ton of heat. Rather than being a sort of infantry carrier like the Vertibird, this thing is fully intent on destroying you with a bunch of mounted weapon systems, including some fully automatic miniguns, as well as some missiles, which I'm just going to say now, will absolutely destroy you. A lot of the enemies included in this mod are definitely intended for the late to end game, and will pretty much wreck you as soon as you run into them. I honestly couldn't kill this thing, and that's true for a lot of the enemies on this list. Without Immortal Mode, I was just going to die. So be warned, when you try to fight this Vertihawk gunship, you're going to have a serious challenge on your hands. Moving on to the Institute, we have one new addition, that is the Biomass Collector. A gigantic crab-like machine that is intended to gather biomass from all around the Commonwealth. As RascalArt states, where do you think all the Gen 3 synths come from? Where did they get all of that biomass, the fleshy tissue? It didn't come from nowhere, and that's where these guys come in. The biomass collectors pick up all kinds of different flora and fauna and take it back to the Institute so that it can be reworked into Gen 3 synths, and I think that's some pretty cool lore. These guys use the animations from the Far Harbor hermit crabs, and I think it works really cool. Transferring that to a robot is a pretty interesting idea. Now, moving on to the railroad, we have something a bit odd. We have what are known as the engrams, which are repurposed synths that are just a little bit different from your typical synth. The regular ones look like standard old synths on Protectron animations, but there are also a few unique ones, all of which that seem to be tied to some sort of popular media, and I assume this is just the railroad having some fun repurposing some of the synths they've defeated in combat. You have one that looks like Harry Potter, one that looks like the Black Knight, one that is James Bond, and one more that is done up like the Silver Shroud. This is definitely a very interesting concept and still a lot of fun. These guys are pretty rare to find. You can find them hidden around the Old North Church, but they are pretty rare. But whenever you do run into them, they are a pretty funny little Easter egg, so keep your eye out for them. Moving on to the Minutemen, what's more suiting than, I don't know, a mobile artillery unit? Yeah, this one doesn't seem the most practical for the Minutemen to build up, but it is really cool. I mean, what's the best reason to pick up the Minutemen as a faction? It's really their artillery, so having some mobile artillery is pretty cool. Trying to fight one of these is very interesting because it can actually walk around, and it rapid fires artillery at you, and it can do it from pretty much any range, so it makes for a pretty difficult enemy. Now, how about the Raiders? They actually get some love in this mod as well. We have the introduction of the Raider mechs, which are some heavy-duty pre-war loaders that have been repurposed by the Raiders. And you'll also run into some augmented Raiders, which are Raiders who have decided to dabble into body modification, adding different robot parts to themselves. RascalArt is also the author behind Fleshsmith, the Automatron add-on, so some of these may look a bit familiar. Additionally, with these augmented raiders, there's one side note. These guys like to dance. No, seriously, you kill these guys and they will dance around non-stop. Stay tuned for the end if you want a cool dancing montage. Moving on to the other raider faction, the Gunners, a much beefier mercenary group, actually does have a new enemy with this mod, and that is the Gunner APU, an armored personnel unit. This is intended to be much heavier than power armor. There actually is a guy inside of this thing, and it makes for a pretty difficult enemy as well. Coming equipped with some missile launchers and some fully auto miniguns, this thing is a pretty big threat, and it's got some beefy armor as well. And then finally, that's going to take us to the last addition to this mod, which is not actually an enemy and is very, very out of place. If you thought any of the other enemies were not lore friendly, well, stay tuned for this one, which is Mekachu. This is going to be a little robot companion that has some real similarities to Pikachu. You can find this guy over at the Wilson Automatoys corporate HQ, and you can take him as a companion. So yeah, you got a cute little buddy who will follow you around and do pretty much nothing. He's not really effective at combat, but he is kind of cute. So if you're a fan of Pokemon and you don't care about lore friendliness, go ahead and pick this guy up. Altogether, this makes for an awesome new mod, adding tons of AI into the game. I know this is a pretty big segment, but I wanted to show off absolutely everything included here. With that, let's try to move quickly through the rest of the mods this week. The next mod we're checking out is known as Widow's Bandana Pack by Widow. This mod's going to add a ton of bandanas that you can wear wrapped around your character's head. I really wanted to showcase this one because there is a bandana I use from one of the Fallout 4 Capital Wasteland project mods that people ask about all the time. Well, now there's a mod that adds one of those bandanas, except it has a ton of customization, including 53 colors and camos to choose from, which is absolutely insane. That's definitely one of the biggest reasons to download this mod. As of right now, if you want to get a hold of any of these bandanas, you simply craft them over at the chemistry station. There's two different versions you can craft, the regular bandana and one that has headphones equipped, and then again, you can change out the colors and camos over at the armor's workbench. Most of them are actual camos, but there are a couple of other interesting designs sprinkled in there as well, so just take your time, go through it, and find one you like. I'm sure that with all of these camo options, there's gotta be at least one that you enjoy. The next mod we're checking out is a pretty interesting little utility mod known as Scarecrows by LHA. That's right, Scarecrows, something that actually makes a lot of sense for the Commonwealth. At your settlement now, you can craft 4 new unique Scarecrows that can help protect your crops. And believe it or not, these Scarecrows are actually functional. And they don't actually scare away crows, as there's not really a crow problem in settlements to begin with, but it does provide food for your settlement. This is pretty interesting because it's an item that adds food to your settlement that doesn't actually produce food. The reason being, if you're scaring away crows, you're going to get more yield out of the crops you're already growing, so I guess that makes a lot of sense. Now, like I said, there are 4 unique different Scarecrows. You can actually only craft 1 of each of these per settlement, so you can have multiples at each settlement, but you can't have multiples at the same settlement, if that makes sense. There are 4 Scarecrows to choose from. One is a jack-o'-lantern, you've got one made out of a Giddy-Up Buttercup, one made out of a broom, and one made out of an old Protectron, and by far, he's my favorite. Definitely a really cool little utility mod, one that you can just slap in your load order. If you want to craft these things, you just head over to the food section of your workshop menu, and they're right there. Pretty cool stuff by LHA, definitely a nice one for you settlement builders out there. The next mod we're checking out is a brand new power armor, and that is Tumbajamba's Synth Power Armor by Tumbajamba. That's right, Tumbajamba, creator of some of the amazing classic armors like the Combat Power Armor and the Spartan Power Armor, has finally returned to the modding scene to bring us the Institute Power Armor. This set of armor is really, really cool, containing a ton of NIF-bashed assets. This armor is actually super customizable, has a ton of options over at the Power Armor Station that not only change the look of the armor, you can also change out a ton of the stats with different upgrades, some of which are visible, some of them are not. You can change out the colors on this thing. There's a lot of really cool stuff here, and there's even a couple of unique pieces that you can find out in the world and add to this armor set as well. Now, as the base version of the mod is concerned, if you want to get your hands on this armor, there are 2 methods. The main method is to head over to the pharmacy in Lexington, where you'll find a new synth trader who will actually sell you a handful of the really cool, unique modifications for this armor set. And there's also a unique crafting station, which is the only place that you can craft these armors. You can't craft these at the chemistry station, you have to go to this very specialized station in this specific location. Additionally, though, you can head over to the FEV lab inside of the Institute and find a couple of other pieces that you can add to this armor set. You won't be able to find any of the base armors, but there are some diver pieces that have a totally different aesthetic that are really, really cool. Now, I'm sure some of you may be wanting this armor to actually appear in-game on some enemies to make some higher level, difficult enemies to fight, and that actually is an option. Not in the main version of the mod, but some people have already made a couple of patches. I believe there's currently one patch that adds crafting abilities to this mod, so you can craft it over at the chemistry station, and I think there's another mod that will add this as a spawnable armor that will spawn on coursers alongside synths around the wasteland, so that you can actually fight enemies that are wearing this armor, making some pretty difficult encounters. Now, something else to note about this mod before we go on to the next one is that Tumbajamba is currently working on more updates to this thing. Between the release of this mod and me covering it right now, there's already been a couple of updates, and as I currently speak, Tumbajamba is posting in my Discord updates of some of the cool stuff he's working on for even more armor pieces for this pack. So stay tuned for those and keep your eye on this mod because there's going to be cool little content drops here and there, allowing you to add even more to this armor set. Now finally, that takes us to the last mod this week, which is the Beta Wave, a standalone Gamma Gun mod by TheWetHarmonica. Now you may recognize this if you're a longtime viewer as the Gamma Gun Replacer mod by Micalov, and that's because that's where all of the assets come from. This gun is designed by Micalov, but in that mod it was actually designed as a replacer for the Gamma Gun. Now, with the Beta Wave by TheWetHarmonica, you can actually have this as a separate weapon that is standalone from the Gamma Gun and has its own unique quirks. This is going to feature a lot of the attachments and visual pieces designed by Micalov, but it's going to function a little bit different. The idea for the Beta Wave is that it's actually intended to be a bit of a stealthier alternative for Children of Atom players to still deal a ton of radiation damage without it being a huge, loud explosion of green goop. Now there are a handful of modifications allowing you to tune the different waves of this weapon so that some of them are louder and do more damage, but some of them are nice and quiet, but of course do less damage. And there's even a couple of modifications to turn this thing into full auto or even add some electrical damage to make this a little bit more of an all-purpose weapon. Of course, you can convert this thing between a rifle and pistol, and it does use the vanilla laser rifle animations, but they fit perfectly. This weapon still uses gamma cells in a cool new gamma cell NIF created by Micalov. Altogether, this is a super cool, lore-friendly weapon for the Children of Atom. If you want to get your hands on this thing in the Beta Wave version of the mod, it'll start spawning after level 8 on the Children of Atom. I went and tested this thing out, and it started spawning almost instantly, so that's pretty cool, and this makes for a really, really fun weapon. This is actually the first mod by TheWetHarmonica, and I have to say, this is a nice little ESP edit. Taking the cool assets by Micalov and making a standalone new weapon, this is definitely a cool start to a future of modding. So, really cool weapon, definitely pick this one up if you're a fan of lore-friendly weapons and you want to expand on the Children of Atom in your game. But with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. That's all the mods that we'll be showcasing this week. Definitely some really, really cool ones, so I highly recommend checking all of these out. They will all be linked down in the description below, along with Xbox links if there are any available. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, don't forget to drop a rating. Consider subscribing if you haven't already for more videos just like this, and a big ol' shout out to all of my patrons for supporting every single video, as well as the mods that I create. And as always, a very special thank you to Avian4, Captain Chaos, Glasma, Helljumper, Indecisive Wolf, Cushy, Logan Rigmaiden, Microhan, Moonlit Gamer, Feed, Scott, Steven, Timmy76, YouthRC, and Voider for joining that Tier 3 Patreon membership. If you'd like to support the channel over on Patreon, you can do so using the link down in the description, but it is completely optional. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Peace!